Hi, I'm Jim Brown. I'm the Alabama Humanities Alliance Project Scholar for the Smithsonian's Waterways exhibit that's traveling through Alabama this year. Anna Mullican of the Oakville Indian Mounds Museum asked me to do this video presentation on the waterways plus Google Earth, a Google Earth approach to Alabama waterways. I'm proud to do it for two reasons especially. First, Oakville is the first of 5 localities in Alabama, first of 5 venues to host the waterways. And second, it's the only one on the list belonging to a local educational system, in this case, of course, Lawrence County school system. And while I hope this will be of some interest to most any Alabama audience, I'm particularly interested in presenting not just waterways related material, but what I have found to be a very engaging instructional technique for consideration by you local teachers. A wrinkle on GIS, Geographic Information Systems, particularly Google Earth. They say even after COVID-19 days, we can expect to have more distance learning in our school systems. And if you haven't already tried it, this GIS approach works almost as well with distance learning as it does in the classroom. So I need to tell you about 2 things first to set the stage. First is that the very first job for a state project scholar for waterways is to produce a waterways reading list. And I figured that over 50 years, I taught a range of courses from world history to Native American and settler ways of fishing in the Southeast. How hard could it be? But the subject of water and how people relate to it grew the more I thought about it. The surface of the globe is 71% water. The human body is about 60% water, and not drinking will kill you a lot faster than not eating. Water is the closest thing to a universal solvent. If there's magic on this planet, said Lauren Isley, it's contained in water. We're drawn to it. We beat paths to waterfalls. We line the shores of lakes with houses. We make regular pilgrimages to the beaches. And in general, we've just taken abundant clean water for granted, especially those of us in the rainy eastern half of the country, east of the 100-degree line of longitude, roughly speaking. But the old folk wisdom that tells us you don't miss the water till the well runs dry may be more applicable to us all today than it's been for centuries. So long story shorter, I came up with a Waterways Bibliography I hope will interest you teachers especially. It's based on a model produced by Smithsonian scholars. It borrows some from those of other states who've already hosted waterways, and a good many of my own additions. It's 22 single space pages of annotated entries divided into 4 parts: the world, the US, the Southeast and the Gulf, and 4th, Alabama. It's anything but comprehensive, which would take a lifetime, but perusing it might start you thinking about water in different ways, as it did me. Here are books as diverse as an Agatha Christie murder mystery set on an island and Jimmy Buffett's Tales of Life on the Gulf Coast. There are 4 books listed that remarkably echo each other on the natural history of the blue crab, the American shad, the codfish, and the oyster. And they all spend about equal time on the social history of the fishing communities that go after them. There are 3 books that are either all or with substantial parts on the steamboat era on the Chattahoochee, the Alabama and its main tributaries, the Coosa and the Tallapoosa and the Tombigbee. There are sweeping theories on the importance of water in history, from Wittfogel's argument that the first civilizations came about for the need for centralized direction of irrigation systems in Egypt and Mesopotamia, to Mahan's late 19th century argument that for the past couple thousand years in the big wars, the world wars, the critical battle was always fought on water, not land. Here are watery adventures from the whale ship Essex to the Mayflower to 2 years before the mast. There are books by and about Thoreau and his physical and mental explorations of Walton Pond, the Merrimack River, and being guided by Native Americans in bark canoes as the first modern tourist in Maine north of the Moosehead, as they say. Bartram's travels in 1776 and 77, especially in parts of today's Alabama, were partly waterborne. There's a set of books on the impending water shortage and possible water wars. There's fiction and nonfiction, science books and art and photography books, a big section on children's books, some really old books, and at least one book published the month the bibliography was finished this past December 2020. But only after the bibliography was finished and sent around did I discover the most readable, most comprehensive book on Alabama water and waterways, past, present, and especially future. And that's Bill Deutsch's Alabama Rivers, A Celebration and Challenge. Part of the reason I missed it was it was just published in 2018. The other part, I guess, is I just missed it. But I'd be surprised if there were any other state that has a recent book so perfectly complementary to this waterways exhibit. The first third of Bill's book is on just how extensive the Alabama river system is, how rich in biology, how rivers form and flow, heavy on the geology and biology. The middle third, 5 chapters in all, is on the natural and human history of Alabama, basin by river basin, starting with the Tennessee, then the Alabama and its 2 big tributaries, Coosa and Tallapoosa, then the Cahaba and Black Warrior basins, although they're not connected, they're side by side, something of a parallel. And then the Tombigbee and Mobile rivers, and last the Chattahoochee and the coastal plain rivers, including the Conecuh, the Pee, the Choctawhatchee down south. The last third of the book is on how public awareness and organization might help shape the future of that precious, indispensable riverine resource. It's richly illustrated, and though it's simply written, it's not simplistic at all. It would be a great resource to use to introduce your students to state and local waterways topics. And I suspect will soon be available in the Oakville Indian Mounds Museum gift shop. Okay, so that was the first of 2 things to set the stage, telling you about the Waterways reading list and the addition of one very important book to the Alabama section. The second thing is on using GIS, Geographic Information Systems, as a classroom instructional aid. The last 20 years of my teaching career, I taught history and sometimes folklore at Samford for 45 years, especially in team-taught courses with geologists and biologists. I got deeply involved with GIS, starting with Esri Arc Suite, but converting for classroom use to Google Earth. I found Google Earth to be free, easy to use, and a Google Earth folder would mail in a small compass because Google Earth reconstructs the basic screen at each computer location. It was a visual stage setting for where the history played out, and it engaged my freshman world history classes better than any teaching aid I had found for decades. And I used it with, I was invited to speak to middle school classes. I used it with my Boy Scout troops, for example, to preview a canoe trip to the Boundary Waters. So I think it will work in almost any K through 12 level. Anyway, when I finally wrote my long worked on modern world history text, I put all the scholarly notes in the endnotes, but the footnotes all referred to matching number layers in matching Google Earth folders. So it was essentially a textbook illustrated with Google Earth. And just a few months ago, on the same pattern, I spent a few weeks Google Earthing up Bill Deutsch's Alabama Rivers book. The main thing I'd like to do in this presentation is to teach you how to use it, should you find the subject matter valuable and the instructional technique of interest. I know there will be a range of expertise among you out there, from those who already use it regularly to those who don't know much about it. So I'll try to play to the middle ground here. So let's see if we can share screen and get Google Earth up and running. So the first thing I would like to do is just talk about the Google Earth screen, and then illustrate the things you can do with it. So when you open Google Earth, most of the screen is a map. And down in the bottom right corner are some interesting numbers. There is the latitude and longitude of wherever the cursor is on the map. There's the elevation on the map. Since it's over sea down here, it's minus, but as you move the cursor, those change, latitude, longitude, and the basic elevation. Latitude and longitude is very exact. The elevations are sort of approximate. And then you have the eye altitude, where you're viewing the surface of the world, your apparent eye altitude. And then up in the top right, you have the navigational tools. And as you move the cursor over the navigational tools, they'll light up. And I'll talk about them in a minute. But here along the top, you have the basic tools, and we'll talk about a good half of those. Basic sorts of layers you can make, the tools you can use to examine the Earth's surface. And then over here on what I call the table of contents side, running down the left, you've got a search box where you can search by latitude, longitude, you can search by city name, place name, feature name. And then there's a places box. When you first open Google Earth, that'll be mostly empty, but this is your places box, things you have used. And I'm working in today this Alabama Rivers sampler folder. And then here's the folder that goes with the book, Alabama River Celebration and Challenge. This will be the main presentation coming up. But down in the bottom are the basic layers that are already there when you open Google Earth. And what I've got turned on, borders and labels, and international borders are yellow, state level borders are white, county level borders are green as you zoom in. Places and photos, these are the photos that are embedded in the surface, the Google Maps photos icons. And then terrain gives you the three-dimensional quality to the screen. This is because Google Earth is essentially aerial photos draped over an underlying TIN, triangulated irregular network. That's kind of a way to mimic the 3D feature of the Earth's surface. So first of all, before I leave the tools, let me talk to you about the advantage of using a mouse instead of your navigational tool. So here I'm going to try to navigate with my pad, my laptop pad. So I go up. If I want to zoom in, I got to go up and then kind of left click on the pad and zoom in like that. If I want to navigate, this is the navigational button. It takes you north, south, east, and west. And the further to the edge you go, the faster it goes. And let me zoom in. Let me zoom in on a part of Alabama that's got some steep terrain, some relief. So I'm going to zoom in, if I can, zoom in on Scottsboro and the Tennessee River Valley thereabouts. And it's really awkward to me to use these particular tools. And then to show the three-dimensional quality of the land, this tips the view. If you click on the top, it tips the view, but nothing is centered. You can tip the view, you can kind of spin the view, but nothing stays centered. Now, with a mouse, let me start mouse navigation now. With a mouse, you can navigate 10 times as fast. If you're willing to invest 15 bucks in a mini mouse for your laptop, you zoom in and out with a roller button. You grab, you left click and grab and pull the terrain like this. And then the neatest thing of all, you can turn the mouse into a joystick. You depress the mouse button, and wherever you depress it, it's going to be the center of your screen. And you pull the mouse towards you to depress the view. And then you start spinning the mouse. You can turn this thing into a real, a combination of pulling and pushing, and you can turn it into a real joystick like that. So, and the only thing I use the toolbar for is to click the end to get north up. Okay, so there's a very brief introduction to the screen. Now let's go to. I want to go through the basic tools and use examples from this basic Alabama Rivers file, but I've got them organized. First, we'll start with place marks. A place mark is what Google Earth calls a point. And this is the icon, the default icon is a push pin. You can change that, but so here is a typical place mark. So I'm going to turn, and you work from left to right with these layers. So I'm going to click in the box to turn it on. I'm going to double left click on the push pin icon to fly to a preset view. This is Moundville, famous American Indian site from roughly 1100 to 1300, right on the Black Warrior River here, downstream from Tuscaloosa. And if you have a blue layer title, it means something is embedded. And so here is, we'll click on that blue layer title, and here's the text I've written: Moundville on the high ground near a bend of the Black Warrior. Click on Google Maps photos icon under pointer, right there. Click on that and pop open a nice photograph somebody has made, and then embedded the photograph in Google Maps photos. So there's one thing you can do. You can embed text. You can choose a photos icon. You could choose this photos icon. You could choose this photos icon of the actual museum. But it's a great, well, you have the aerial photography in living color and 3D, and you have these photographs made on the site. It's a great way to explore things. And then you can embed websites. So here is an old colored postcard of a 19th century Coosa River steamship called the Leota. And so I've just made a general place mark, and I have embedded the website in the place mark. And all you have to do is click on the website, and there you have the picture of the old paddle wheeler, stern wheeler Leota. We're back out of that. So there's at least a couple examples of how to use place marks. Now let's talk about paths. Let me turn off paths. So a path is Google Earth's word for a line. You just click a series of points to make a line. So you can do a road. This is the old federal road. It comes from Milledgeville, Georgia, crossing down south of west today Columbus, and just grazing the southern edge of west today Montgomery, heading on down to Fort Stoddard where it ended. So here's 1805, based on an old creek trading path, and then it becomes the Three Blaze Trail, and then the old federal road, and then of course rivers. And so here are paths I have clicked along the major rivers that affect Alabama, mostly Alabama. So these are mostly Alabama rivers, and you can make the paths any color. I've made them sort of aqua colored, and you can make them bigger or smaller. And so I've made, for example, Tennessee is a pretty big river coming from Alabama corner to corner, and the Cahaba is not so big a river. So I've made it a narrower river, but it took a while to click them, but now you've got them, and you can copy them and paste them and move them around from folder to folder. And there are two neat things you can do with with a line, with a path. So let me take you to the Saugahatchee. Bill Deutsch is based in Auburn, and so the Saugahatchee he uses as a local stream for him, running just north of Auburn. So there are two things you can do. Here's the Saugahatchee, and here are the thinner lines, the major tributaries of the Saugahatchee. The first thing you can do with a line, you can do an elevation profile. So I'll right click on the layer title, the path that says Saugahatchee Creek, and run down almost to the bottom. It says show elevation profile. And so when you click on that, it pulls up a elevation profile of the line. Now I've got the river kind of clicked backwards, but if I start over here at the bottom of the river, about where it goes into the Tallapoosa, and I move the cursor along the graph at the bottom, an arrow on the map at top shows you just where you are. Now this is not exact. Google Earth doesn't do as good a job with elevation. You can see some little spikes that shouldn't be there. But as you come up here, there's a flat line up here just north of Auburn and Opelika. That's Lake Saugahatchee. And we're going across Lake Saugahatchee. And then we're doing the headwaters of the creek. And Bill makes the argument in the book that most often the headwaters of creeks are steeper than the lower courses. And you can see that you can just illustrate that to your class with most any of these rivers by doing elevation profile. But there's even a neater thing you can do with lines. You can fly along the lines at any camera tilt angle, distance above the Earth's surface, and speed up to 1,000 miles an hour or so. So on Salkehatchie Creek, what I have done, if you were to fly Salkehatchie Creek, you could fly it, but all the bends and turns would give you visual whiplash. So what I've done here, I have clicked a much simpler path, kind of generally from Lake Salkehatchie here, coming in over Lake Salkehatchie, going down along the creek till it hits the Cahaba. And if you will, first of all, you need to do the settings. You need to set the camera tilt angle, the distance. And so this says set camera tilt angle to 45 degrees, camera range to 5,000 meters, speed to 1,000, which is max. And so you go up to Tools, drop-down menu, choose Options, choose Touring, and then you set these things. And I've already been here because I already set camera tilt angle to 45, camera range to 5,000, camera speed to 1,000. I say okay. And now I'm gonna visually turn the layer off to turn the white line on so it doesn't interfere with your view in the creek. And with this, but as long as this is highlighted in blue, now all you do is hit this little right facing arrow on the right and sit back and fold your arms, and we'll fly down the Salkehatchie in about 2 minutes time. So here's Salkehatchie Lake, which, as Bill laments, development goes right down to the shore, so you get a lot of wash and runoff. And here goes the river and the big tributary coming in by the sewage treatment plant from Opelika. There are new neighborhoods and old. You can see some of the color lines, like this is there are different aerial photos are pasted together. And this is made more in the summertime. This is made in the wintertime. In wintertime, you can see the hardwoods sort of as a brownish gray and the conifers as a dark green. Here's another tributary coming in. Lochipoka over on the left, little crossroads. Here's an enormous quarry the creek goes by that was caused major problems for the creek, as Bill details in the book. But if you want to visit the quarry, you could, and you can stop this thing if you want to stop and talk about any terrain. You can stop with a little bar, and then you can start it again. And so we're coming into, it just dips down into Macon County, and then it comes over into Tallapoosa County, and we're heading across mainly forest land. You can see recent clear cuts. Here's a recent clear cut, except they haven't cut right along the creeks here. And then hardwood forest and planted pine forest. See East Tallahassee up here, crossroads it shows. And we're approaching now the Tallapoosa River itself. You can see the ridges, the logging roads on the ridges. You can see some of the growth that's been left. And look, this is the date of the aerial photography is March 6, 2019. So it's spring. Look at the rains and all the silt they're carrying into the Tallapoosa. And this is a very clean Tallapoosa right downstream from Lake Martin Dam. So, but this is I think is a wonderful feature of Google Earth. You can fly any path, any road, any river, any path you click. A great visual for your students. The third tool is a polygon, and the symbol is the hexagon. But a polygon is Google Earth speak for an area. And so we're just talking about Salkehatchie. And so here is Salkehatchie watershed. That's the drainage basin of the Salkehatchie. And you can make any polygon filled or transparent, and the filling can be solid to any degree of transparency. So I've just chosen sort of a light green and a wash to contrast with the creek. And the other thing you can do, you can sort of nest these sorts of things. First of all, here is the Black Warrior River watershed. So here's an overview of Alabama, and here is the Black Warrior watershed. As Bill says in his book, it's like a giant left footprint on the state. The big toe is the Locust Fork and tributaries. The second toe is the Mulberry, and then the rest of the toes are the Sipsey and Smith Lake up here. Here's the Black Warrior in kind of a white outline and a kind of a green wash. And then the Bankhead National Forest is up here in the fourth and fifth toe area of the big footprint. And it's mostly in, a little bit here in Lawrence County, mostly in Winston County. And then if you want to know exactly where the Sipsey Wilderness is, here's the Sipsey Wilderness. So it's a great visual construction of things. The other thing you can do is do sort of areas. There's a lot of talk in the book about Native American times and the transition and the histories and the use of the rivers. The lower creeks lived essentially down here. The upper creeks lived up here. The boundaries of their territories are fairly vague most places, but the cessions, that is the parts that were taken by the colonialists, are very clearly defined either by river channels or by surveyors. And so this is the outline of territory taken from 1805 to 1832. And you can turn them on one at a time. Here's 1805 taken, and then the Georgians built Milledgeville right there, overlooking the frontier threateningly. The big one, this is Andy Jackson's demands in 1814 after the Creek War. That's essentially half the land, right? And here is 1818 in Georgia, 1821 in Georgia, 1826 in Georgia. So all the creek lands in Georgia taken except that little sliver right there. And then 1832, the very last taken. And a few years later, of course, the creeks all pushed westward on the tragic Trail of Tears. But this is one neat way to use polygons. And then another thing is, Bill talks, for example, about the drinking gourd. Follow the drinking gourd. It was a song and a folklore about how escaping slaves could get out from under slavery. And so you went up the Mobile and the lower Tombigbee, and you followed the Tombigbee till it ran out. And then you kept following the Big Dipper, that is generally north, until you hit you left the Little River, and then you hit the Big River, which is the Tennessee, going north through West Tennessee and a little bit of Kentucky, and then you're across the magic line into places where slavery was not legal. So I've just clicked a polygon of arrows to show that drinking gourd demonstration. And then, of course, combinations of place marks, paths, and polygons can be really rich. And I would argue there's a synergy here. That is, they have a power. They can have a power greater than the sum of their parts. So let me show you, for example, here are Bessemer city limits. I want to show you in terms of Bessemer city limits and where the public library is. So here's a polygon or several polygons to show you the city of Bessemer. And here's where the Bessemer Public Library is, the third venue for this Waterways exhibit, incidentally. And then here is Red Mountain, kind of intermittently coming across Jefferson County, running just southeast of the main part of Jefferson, coming right. It bisects Bessemer, although the city part of Bessemer is over here on this part of the line. Now look at the watersheds. Here is the Shades Creek watershed. Shades Creek tributary, Shades Creek watershed. Shades Creek is, of course, a tributary of the Cahaba. And shown here in a light white wash is that it's mostly separated from the Black Warrior drainage by Red Mountain, although it poaches a little bit over here. But it's on this part. And then on the other side, you've got Valley Creek. And I've done it. Here's Valley Creek in green, and its watershed in green coming out of the southeast side of Birmingham. And so you can see that Red Mountain generally bisects those two watersheds. But if you don't know where you are, this is the sort of thing you can do with Placemark, with paths, and with polygons. A really sort of rich illustration, I think. Now, one more before we get to the main going through the book sequentially. Let me take you up and show you a couple of more tools. One is the measure tool up here on top. Here's a measure tool, and you can measure a line, you can measure a path, you can measure a polygon, circle. For example, if you want to measure the width of Alabama from, say, Columbus across straight west, you click here and you click here, and it's just at 200 miles. And you can click down to, you can probably measure something as little as 10 to 15 feet with a measure tool. But let me show you what else you can do with a measure tool. Here, for example, here's Lake Martin. Here's a polygon. It took me about an hour to click. Lake Martin has such incredibly indented shorelines, but it's hard to kind of get an idea how big it is. And so what I've done, I have clicked a 20-mile diameter circle just to give you an idea. Here's Alexander City. Here's Dadeville on 280. And so I've just clicked a circle. And let me do the same thing with Bankhead Lake. So here, just to give you a demonstration, here's Bankhead Lake, centered in the picture, and I'm going to go up here and choose measure tool and choose circle, and I'm going to start about right here, pretty close to the middle, and click left click, and then I'm going to drag the circle out, and I'm going to make it's going to be 10-mile radius, 20-mile diameter. So I'm going to get about 10 miles out and close as I can get and stop, and then say save. And Google Earth has now saved that for me, and I'll turn it into a yellow one like the other one, and say okay. And then we zoom out, and you can the polygons are done in different things, but you can see here these lakes are comparable in size because a 20-mile radius, a 20-mile diameter circle, pretty well describes each one. Sort of thing you can do. The other thing you can do with a measure, let's see, is that good enough for a measure tool? The other tool I want to talk about is historical imagery. For example, the aerial photos that make up the Google Earth surface, you can cycle back through those 20 years or so. So here is Lake Purdy that supplies Birmingham with about half of its water. It's in, you can see there's a little part in an upper valley, here's a middle valley, and here's a lower valley, and here's the dam right down here, Lake Purdy. And Bill talks about the drought of October 2016. So if you hit the historical imagery, which looks like a green arrow wrapped around a clock, if you hit the historical imagery, you can work back through time. So this is a very current view. This is April this year. We'll go back to March of this year. This is August of 2019. This is April of 2018. And this is October 2016. This is the height of the exceptional drought. And you can see about half of Lake Purdy has totally dried up. Your students will get a kick out of this. They can find out when their neighbors built their swimming pool, what month or year at least. But it's awfully good to use to examine environmental features and development as well. So that's the end of the general instruction. let's take a break just a minute and go again. Okay, now let's turn to the book proper. At least this Google Earth folder illustrating the book. Let me share screen with Google Earth one more time. And now we'll go through this. This is a Google Earth folder that Anna Mulliken can provide you called Alabama River Celebration and Challenge. And let's, for example, the major folder has a blue layer title, which means something embedded. So let's click on that folder. And it says this Google Earth folder, it's called a KMZ file, is to illustrate when possible Deutsch's book, Alabama Rivers. And then if you click on the website, you get a picture of the book. So there's the cover of the book. And then we go to chapter 1, a very short chapter, but a really interesting chapter, starting out with the Great Seal. And so here is the Great Seal of Alabama. This is an image overlay that shows the Great Seal. I've still got some things turned on from the, let me turn off these other Alabama things. But here is the image overlay of the Great Seal of Alabama. And you can tell it's unusual in that it's mainly rivers, and they're all labeled. And if you notice, every one of those names is either a Native American Indian name or direct translation, like the P and the Black Warrior River. And here are the rivers of the Great Seal here that show. And look what you can do to manipulate the Great Seal. If you put the Great Seal layer in editing mode, if you right click on it and choose properties, it's in editing mode. And now you can take this clear to opaque bar and you can slide it left and make it any degree of transparency, slide it back right. So students can know where they are. You maybe turn on the roads layer, which from this altitude mainly shows the interstates. Then you slide back, you see Birmingham is a big node, and then Montgomery down there. And you slide it back to make people can see right where they are. So there's the Great Seal that emphasizes the rivers of Alabama. Chapter 2 is on the first really substantial chapter is on the in terms of length is on the incredible riverine system we have in Alabama because of latitude and rainfall, because of geology. Bill makes a point, there are almost no natural lakes. If you don't count Oxbow Lakes, where a river bend gets cut off, almost no natural lakes in Alabama. But he says there is one down there in Florida. There are lakes in the north left because of glacial things that are left, or maybe recent uplifts of land. And then down in the sinkhole territory, when you get down in the Florida limestone plains. So here is Lake Florella or Lake Jackson, depending on what state you're in. And obviously it's only half in Alabama. So you can make a good point. Very few lakes in Alabama. And you start talking about geological reasons for why. And here is a image overlay of Alabama river basins. There's a good image of this in Bill's book, but here's a second one. If you'd like to see all the different catchment areas in Alabama. And then here is another image overlay. This is the Mobile Basin, and it's shown in green here. Obviously, a little bit of Georgia, a touch of Tennessee, and a little bit of Mississippi. But obviously, 2/3 of Alabama is drained by these Mobile Basin rivers. I won't do this, but here's a place mark called Down on the River. You can just embed a website. If you want to listen to the group Tennessee sing Down on the River that's talked about by Bill, all you have to do is click on this website. It's a YouTube website. You have to sit through 5 minutes, 5 seconds of advertisements, then you get the song There's the Moundville thing I've already done, and the Lower Creek thing's already been done, creek sessions. Old Cahaba, he talks about the first capitals, Cahaba and then Tuscaloosa and Montgomery, all river capitals. And you can zoom into, this is just downstream of where the Cahaba hits the Alabama. And you can still see in the aerial photo very clearly the old layout of the town, and lots of Google Earth photos, icons for your students to pursue. And then he talks about fall line cities, where the river came out of the hard rock areas. Here are fall line cities. And here is an image overlay that shows you the fall line across the whole southeast, coming down from Maryland on down across the Virginia and the Carolinas. In chapter 3, how rivers form, it's heavy on geology, really interesting. Here is an 1849 geology map. They already knew this was the hard rock part of the state was up here in the left, these especially Ridge and Valley part and the Cumberland Plateau and all this. And here's the coastal plain stuff, fanned out like this, less consolidated thing. Here's the fall line for review right across that map. And then here is one of what Bill calls a paintball fight geology map. Alabama is so complex geologically, and each of those geologic eras is shown by a different color. He calls it a paintball fight of the land. How rivers flow. He talks about a T-Rex relative found very close to Montgomery. And I have embedded here a web image of what fossil hunters think it looked like. A feathered monster, finding more and more feathered dinosaurs. What ended he talks about the asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs as much as anything. Here's an image overlay that shows where it hit. And there are tsunamis all up in what's today Alabama, still recognizable by geologists. He talks about the Christmas flood in Auburn of 2015, almost a 100-year flood. And here is I've just found a picture on the web of a flooded street and a car. And should students doubt that there was a Christmas flood in Auburn, there's an image. And then, of course, you can go to Lake Purdy 10 months later in October and see the drought in Lake Purdy. One of the most interesting things I think in this chapter is what Bill calls his sausage link theory, the popular conception of rivers. Let me turn these off and do them one at a time. He was talking to a bank fisherman in Lochapoka, which is a little crossroads west of Auburn. And they're both fishermen, so they got talking about the rivers. And the fisherman knew about a place called Drunk Creek, where a bridge over a local little creek where people went to drink. He knew about another creek called Stink Creek, which was close to the old sewage treatment, very inefficient, early inefficient sewage treatment plant coming out of Opelika. And then he knew about zoom out a little bit. Then he knew about a kind of a creek he called Poca Creek, just out here in the country from Lochapoka. So he thought those were 3 different creeks, and he didn't realize they were all part of the Salkehatchie. They're all part of the same creek. It educates you to realize that's one creek, and it educates you even more to realize what drainage you're in, because everything liquid pouring on the surface of this doesn't get absorbed in the ground and in the groundwater anyway, runs down that creek. And if you build a house over here, you're affecting the river, you're affecting the Salkehatchie, the Tallapoosa, the Alabama, and Mobile Bay, if you let that siltation run off. But he called that his sausage link theory of rivers. And then his chapter on the river critters, on how rich and plants and animals Alabama is, because of its latitude, its rainfall, its rich river network. And he talks particularly about a little family of darters called Ethiostoma. So here I've just put together, he's got a picture of one darter in the book, but there are only so many pictures you can put in a book. So I've got 4 more. Here's one Ethiostoma. Here's a second. Here's a third. This is one I know, Stigmayam, the speckled darter. And here is a fourth. Oh, it's not gonna. This one's not gonna show up. Sorry, but here's a similar site about turtles. Here's the great alligator snapping turtle. We're talking maybe 150 pounds. Looks like a dinosaur in profile, if you see one ever out sunning. There's an incredible variety in color. Here's an animated pancake, the spiny soft shell. Here's a red-bellied turtle. Beautiful little creatures. And the same with mussels. Alabama is the richest state in the country and one of the hot spots of the world for mussels. That was the snuff box. Here's the pocketbook. Here's the fine line pocketbook. Here's a net full of wonderful names like heel splitter. So anyway, just a way to more richly illustrate the book with these sorts of things. Now, the middle part of the book is my favorite part of the book because it deals with river basin by river basin, going through the state. The history, human history, linked with the natural history. And what I'm going to do is just do one of these. Chapter 6 on the Tennessee River. Since Oakville Indian Mounds is in a museum is in the Tennessee River drainage, we'll do that one. But there is the Alabama and its 2 major tributaries, the Cahaven Black Warrior, the Tombigbee, and these Google Earth really comes into its own with these. So just here's the Tennessee River watershed. Let me turn on the main branches of the Tennessee. So here's the watershed of the Tennessee. I'll turn off watershed, and he talks about the controlling of the Tennessee by the dams. Most of them TVA, although Wilson got started back in World War I. But here are the 9 major dams on the Tennessee, and there are 4 major lakes in Alabama. Lake Gunnersville that runs up towards Scottsboro and beyond. Here is Wheeler Lake and Wheeler Dam. Here's Wilson Lake and Dam, the earliest one. And here's Pickwick Dam. Even though Pickwick Dam is not in Alabama, most of the lake is in Alabama. And then there are 4 dams on the Bear Creek tributary. Up here in the northeast corner of the state, here's Bear Creek. And there are 4 dams. Each of them has, of course, a little lake of their own, like this. So a pretty good visual way to illustrate the state. He talks about Monsanto Mountain when he talks about the biology, especially the vegetation of the north. So here's a 3D view of Monsanto Mountain back of Huntsville. And state champion cucumber, magnolia, yellow buckeye, and spice bush come from here. And then he talks about the percentage of forest cover and agriculture in Tennessee drainage. And so in black, I've made a polygon. This is the Tennessee drainage inside the state of Alabama. And you can see the forest cover is dark green by and large. Here's Paint Rock River and its tributaries up here in the hill country. This is like West Virginia when you drive up through here. And then here's some more forest over here on the Mississippi line, a little more lowland forest. And then the light green is mostly agricultural. And then when you zoom in on cities like Decatur and Huntsville, it's whites and grays. Here's the octopus that Huntsville is becoming these days with its growth. But a great visual way to kind of do ecological things and almost sociological things as you look. He talks about the TAG, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia area. Here's Ellison's Cave. He spends time with just over in Georgia. Here is the Blowing Wind Cave, famous for its the Soda Cave, the National Wildlife Reserve for the bats that come out by the zillions summer evenings. Here is the Fern Cave National Wildlife Refuge. The parts of it shown here are Cathedral Caverns not far away. All these last three within 5 miles of each other. And there are in there, of course, these photos icons to explore, should you wish. Your students can explore them as you go. And here, almost to Tennessee, I mean, within a stone's throw of Tennessee, Russell Cave National Monument, right up here on the Tennessee line. Well, 2 or 3 stones throw maybe, but close. And then here is, he talks about the archaeology of Wooders Creek with all its prehistoric Native American habitations in Wooders Creek coming here. The Florence Indian Mound, I've never been there and I didn't realize it's right downtown. So right on the, right within sight of the old river and right downtown. Of course, a nice park today with a museum, but here's Florence Indian Mound. Huntsville's Big Spring Park, still there. Here is, let me skip on to the Muscle Shoals barrier to navigation. This red line were the classic shoals that made the Tennessee pretty well worthless for navigation. Here's a railroad they ran from Tuscumbia to Decatur. With the up or down river, they would offload goods on the railroad and take it on the railroad to bypass the rapids. And then eventually, of course, Wilson Dam was built and then other dams to make, with the lock system, to make transportation possible here. And there are old pictures and new pictures, and you can zoom in on Wilson Dam, should you wish, and click in on, there's some modern day and some ancient photos, but here's for example, here's a good picture of the Locken Dam, of this oldest, finished in 1924. And then one of the neat things Google Earth can show you are parks and national wildlife refuges. And there is down here in the more, in the basic layers under more, there's the thing that says parks and recreation. If you click on that, it will, for example, it will outline in dark green, it will outline, for example, Wheeler National Wildlife Refuge. Now, most of us know Wheeler. You come up I-65, turn on roads. Let me turn on roads to illustrate. You come up I-65 to go into Decatur, and you cross some of the, you cross Flint Creek and that part of it, and you can go in here and you can observe the cranes in this little part. I had no idea Wheeler Wildlife. It gerrymanders all the way over almost to Huntsville. Beautiful sort of thing. But you can do that sort of, let me turn roads off, which kind of complicates the screen a little bit. One of the things he talks about here, what he talks about later on, is Flint Creek and Little Flint Creek. And in 1950, the farmers, all the cotton farmers around, put toxaphene on their crops, and the August rains washed them off and killed all the fish in the river. And it was written about one of the specific examples given in Rachel Carson's 1962 Silent Spring, which really jump-started the modern conservation ecological movement. At the end of every chapter, Dr. Deutsch has 4 or 5 important people from that drainage area in the history of the state. And this is where General Wheeler himself lived. His house was called, house and estates were called Pond Springs. So here's the house, and here's somebody who's conveniently left us a photo. So here's Pond Spring, the General Joe Wheeler home. Helen Keller birthplace, C.W. Handy birthplace, Jesse Owens Museum. Jesse Owens Museum is, of course, with just really, really close to the Oakville Indian Mounds in Lawrence County. Here's the Jesse Owens Museum, and it's got got not only a picture of the house, but a sign about the memorial park. Slackwater darter is one of the rarest fishes in Alabama, and there are 3 little patches where it's found. And here they are, 3 little patches shown in green where that particular darter is. And here is Flint Creek and environs. This is where the great toxaphene spill was that destroyed fish in the river and set people thinking about what are we doing with pesticides? How should they be used? So I won't do the other chapter 7 on the Alabama, chapter 8 on the Cahaba and Black Warrior, chapter 9 on Tombigbee and the Mobile Delta, chapter 10 on Coastal Plain. But let's go to the last and sample how rivers change. He talks about how rivers draw water from one system and put wastewater back into another, kind of changing the hydrology. And Dothan, for example, is on a divide. Here's the Chattahoochee River watershed, and Dothan is right on the high line between that and the Choctawhatchee river system. So he talks about how water gets exchanged by cities. In chapter 13, he talks about personalizing your own ethic, and he talks about he's a scientist with a soft spot for the humanities, and he talks about, for example, some 4 19th century paintings by Thomas Cole called The Voyage of Life. And so what I've done is simply made a place mark with a web address in each place mark. And so here is the first, called Childhood. It's a brand new boat on the headwaters, and then the second one is called Youth. Give it a minute to come up. I've got too many. Sorry, I've got too many things going on Google Earth. It may not work. But that's the sort of thing you can do with this. Chapter 14, his philosophy at the end of the book. I don't have anything on that at all. But here at the very end of the chapter, he's got Langston Hughes reading his classic poem, "The Negro Speaks of Rivers," and that might be a good way to conclude. So here is the YouTube. We have to sit through a few seconds of advertisements and then we turn it off. And so you get the poet himself reading his poem. So this is the sort of thing Google Earth can do to illustrate a book, in particular Bill Deutsch's Alabama Rivers book. If you got any questions about it, I'd be tickled to talk to you about it. Anna Mulligan can refer you to me. And I would like to conclude by inviting those of you who have not come who have not come to the Waterways exhibit in Oakville Indian Mounds Museum. It's well worth a trip. And speaking of the Tennessee drainage, it next goes to the Gunnersville Museum. So thank you very much.